and I'm talking to Jerry Brainum about his December Applied Metabolics newsletter. Hey, Jerry, how's it going, buddy?
How are you, How are you, Richard?
I'm hanging in there for a geezer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just got there's Thanksgiving just happened, and so I got an extra day off this year, so I'm in a pretty good mood.
All right. Good. Did you eat a lot of food on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I went to a buffet, so Diane didn't have to cook.
Yeah.
So that was pretty good. Did have a big mess to clean up,
Oh,
and
that's
it's pretty good. So it worked out. Yeah. We
I
didn't have a lot of people in town. We'd already had a bunch of relatives over a couple of weeks ago
yeah.
from out of town, and so we just had a mild Thanksgiving. How
I,
about you?
I didn't really do anything special, but when you mentioned buffet, it brings back a lot of memories of my bodybuilding days, when I used to go off my diet on Sundays. Me and the guys in the gym, we hit the all-you-can-eat buffets, and I can't tell you how many of those I was thrown out of. I mean, I had a big after. I remember one of them. Funny story. One of them had a sign out. It said "all-you-can-eat," and I went in there with three other guys, and at the end of the meal, the owner of the restaurant comes up and he requested that I don't come back again. and then the next day I was driving by, and the sign had been changed. Instead of "all you can eat," it said "best you can eat." I'll never forget that. That was hilarious.
There was a guy at when I was living in Texas, and there was in Dallas. There was this steak place that had all-you-can-eat steak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of us ate about 6 steaks, And then this other guy, this huge guy, he decided to get another one, right?
Yeah.
But the waitress came with the bill, and he said, "Get this out of here, bring me some more meat." So I got embarrassed with that guy.
Oh.
Yeah, they weren't too happy about us because usually business went there, right? Businessmen.
Right.
So they only had like 1 steak, 1.5 steaks, 2 steaks, and that's it. We come in and start chowing down.
Well, that's the way most people eat. In other words, see, they had like a vegetable and salad section, and then they had a meat section, and all of the gym guys went for the meat. So we didn't touch the salads. And the meat, of course, is the expensive stuff. We'd pile on like pounds of meat on the plate. It was like a mountain of meat.
There's a buffet in college, too, at Baylor University in Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
There's this buffet like that. And a bunch of us guys from the dorm went in there. And this one guy kept stuffing and stuffing. The waitress got kind of ticked, and he got mad because they were saying something to him about it. But anyway, yeah. So what do you got for us this month?
Oh, okay. December, I got some interesting order. You remember last month, Richard, I kind of went into a lot of depth about cortisol and cortisol.
Oh, yeah.
Because
it's a very informative article, too, because I just had negative feelings about that whole thing, right?
Well, a lot of people do. There's a lot of misconceptions about cortisol because it's considered the primary catabolic hormone for muscle. So it's almost like a dirty word in the bodybuilder's vocabulary, But I was hoping to enlighten the readers to show that cortisol is more than just yes, it is anti-catabolic under certain circumstances. There's no question about it. But it also has a couple of good effects, such as, you might remember I talked about how it's fat mobilizing effect, which might surprise a lot of people. But
surprised me because I just thought, man, you don't get enough sleep, your cortisol goes up, and it's catabolic and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's true. And of course, as you age, cortisol tends to accumulate in the brain, and it actually destroys the neurons in the hippocampus area that are involved with learning and memory. So they think, believe it or not,
that's what happened to me.
No, you know the old expression, we hear it all the time, senior moments where you'll forget in the middle of a sentence. I do it myself sometimes where wait, where was I? Or you forget your keys. That is actually what you're experiencing there. Is probably the effects of cortisol on the hippocampus. It doesn't mean you have dementia or you're heading for Alzheimer's. No relation whatsoever. And the good part is that you can actually do stuff about it, which I talked about in the article. Some of those nutrients that will oppose that. But anyway, in the course of the article, I came across a couple of. I don't know if you've heard of this thing. It's all over the internet and books. It's this thing called adrenal fatigue. And I said to myself, well, is this stuff real? And I did a little basic research, and it showed that all the MDs and endocrinologists that specialize in hormones, they deny that adrenal fatigue exists. And it said it's a fad diagnosis. It was made up by a chiropractor in 1998.
Figures.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Adrenal Fatigue. And that started the whole thing. And now they have supplements to treat it. They have a lot of doctors who are treating it. And, they're treating basically what the gist of the article is. I go into, it's kind of like an investigational article where I give both sides of the story. I say what the adrenal fatigue proponents say shows that you have adrenal fatigue, the symptoms, and also I show the medical evidence for it. And just to finish it up, I kind of like complete the article by talking, not assuming anyone has adrenal fatigue, but I give the best ways to actually deal with stress. So if you think you have adrenal fatigue, this is the way to avoid it and cure it. That's the first one. And then I did an article on, I've done articles on...
Oh, can I ask you a question for you?
Go ahead.
I thought that one of the problems with HIIT was adrenal fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
With HIIT training. That's a fallacy?
Mike Mentzer used to say that. He used to say that... not Mike Mentzer. The critics of it used to say that going to failure caused your adrenal... It was just too much on the adrenal glands. And as I point out in this article, you'll see why. There is something called adrenal insufficiency. That's not the same as adrenal fatigue, and that could be caused by excessive stress, but it's not the same thing. And see, the point being, you'll say, well, what's the difference? The point being is adrenal fatigue, the proponents say your adrenal glands actually stop producing hormones. In other words, they get so weak that they can't even kick out cortisol. Now, whereas the difference with adrenal insufficiency is that it's accepted that your adrenal glands continually make these hormones. They don't stop making them. It's just that the stress overwhelms the adrenals to the point where it's not manufacturing enough of the hormones to deal with the stress. That's the difference, see?
Okay.
Well,
I can't wait to read that article.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one. I think it'll clear up, probably save a lot of people a lot of money who are spending money on these adrenal fatigue supplements, all that crap, But on the other hand, there are supplements that I list that really do definitely modulate stress. This is evidence-based. This is some sort of cult thing. And everything I write is based on medical evidence. So this stuff, if you are under stress and you take these supplements, they are going to help you a lot. They're going to help you sleep. They're going to calm your mind. They're going to help you deal with stress. The next one, I've done a couple articles on fish oil, Rick.
Oh, yeah.
And most of the articles
I started taking them after those articles.
Well, yeah. Well, most of the articles I've done have been in relation to the health effects of fish oil. In other words, you might remember the one about, in fact, you asked me about this, there was some studies coming out that said that fish oil does nothing to help prevent cardiovascular, nothing at all. This was in Medical Journal. And I was incensed when I read that. I said, my God, because I've seen the literature and I know that it's a bold-faced lie. And sure enough, when I did that article, I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you remember, I pointed out that, first of all, the studies were flawed. They gave fish oil to people that were eating fish every day. I mean, it's like pouring water in a glass that's already full. Why would fish oil help you if you're not deficient in it? The second thing was, in other studies, they gave one capsule of fish oil. That's like 1/5 the dosage to affect cardiovascular disease. So anyway, but this new article, I talk about another big controversy about fish oil. How does it affect exercise, muscle gains? There's a lot of articles on the net and in bodybuilding magazines where I haven't looked at, I'm guessing, that they talk about fish oil being a fat burner. They talk about fish oil helping you. In fact, some of the newest studies show, particularly if you're over 40, fish oil seems to have an anabolic effect. And in this article, I look at the evidence and I show, does fish oil have an anabolic effect on muscle? And if so, I don't just leave it at that. See, for educated people like yourself, I go into the mechanisms. I don't just say, yeah, it helps you build big muscles and leave it at that, like I see a lot of articles do. And I assume that some of the people reading this have an IQ of over 90, and I go into the exact mechanisms. Why does fish oil? How can fish oil help you build and maintain muscle as you age? So that's the next article.
Yeah, people with IQs at 90 and below are reading the muscle magazines.
They're reading the muscle.
Those above are getting you applied metabolics.
Yeah, or else they're not reading at all. They have this 10-second they have the 10-second attention span, where if you do a 5-minute video, they can't get through the first minute. I feel sorry for those people. Anyway, the next I trained. I don't know if you remember a guy named Vince Gironda, Richard. Remember the famous? I trained at his gym, and I got to know him really well. And one of the things that I was at a very I listen. I even with my big mouth, I just listened to him talk, and I kind of soaked in a lot of his knowledge that he taught me. I didn't know nearly as much. I was 19 years old when I met him, 18 years old. But the point is, one of his tenets, which I thought even at the time was kind of weird, was Vince used to say that fat burns fat. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how could fat burn fat? And he went into this explanation but he never really went into the mechanisms or the possibilities. He just made a flat statement, fat burns fat. Mm-hmm. Well, I came across some recent studies that show that the statement made by Vince to me almost 50 years ago turns out to be true. Fat does burn fat. In other words, it's not that fat actually, when I say burn, in other words, the scientific term is oxidized. What fat actually, certain types of fat have the ability to kind of act as a kindling, so to speak, to burn the bad kinds of fat, like saturated fat. That's the fat found on your body. If you consume certain proportions of other fats, you will actually help burn body fat and excess amounts of saturated fat. In fact, the main study that I talk about, they found that if you eat certain meals composed of a certain percentage of let's say, polyunsaturated fats like fish oil, you can actually neutralize. To me, this should have made the headlines. I don't know why it didn't make the news wire. You can neutralize all the negative effects of eating saturated fat. I mean, that is tremendous information that people should know about. I didn't see it anywhere. Nobody wrote about it, so I wrote about it.
Well, glad I just ordered some more fish oil the other day.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's you know, and then you're gonna like this other one. This other one is I don't know if you've probably seen guys like this over the years, Richard. I'm sure you know you owned a gym. You must have seen a lot of guys that.
Crazy stuff.
Well, you see these guys, and they come in, and they get huge. I mean, they really respond. I mean, drugs or not, these guys get huge. And you look at the weights they're using, and it's like baby weights. Yeah. In the article, I talked about a friend of mine. You might remember this guy competing in Paul Dillette. Remember Paul Dillette?
Oh, yeah.
Paul Dillette was
huge.
Oh, my God, this guy was... I've seen him all over the years, and this guy's probably the biggest bodybuilder I've ever seen as far as muscle density. He made Arnold look skinny. That's how big this guy was. And this guy used to struggle with 30-pound dumbbell curls. I'm telling you, the guy was weak as a kitten, and yet he was huge. And I know that somebody listening is right away, the first thought that comes on, yeah, well, it's all drugs. Yeah, well, it's a lot more than that. Because I'm telling you, this guy, and yes, there was a genetic component, but my point in this article is that there's a notion, long-held notion, that to get bigger muscles, you got to get stronger. Stronger muscles equal bigger muscles. And in this article, I show that isn't necessarily true. I'm not saying not to lift heavy weights. If you want to get stronger, there's no way around not lifting heavy. But in other words, what the studies do, and I've had other articles in Applied Metabolics about this research showing that you can use as little as 20% of 1 rep maximum. That's lighter than warm-up weights. But if you do higher reps to failure, you get the same effect in muscle as if you use 90% of 1 rep. That's heavy weight. But the key is it has to be done to failure. But in this article, I go into more detail about that, and I explain why having, you can have relatively large muscles without having a lot of strength. It's something that's kind of overlooked, but it's coming to be true. But again, there's no way, if you want to be, like, for example, get stronger in your bench press or squat, you're not going to do it by lifting 20% of 1 rep for a 30 rep. You're going to have to lift heavy weights. There's no way. For strength, you can't get away. But in other words, I explain why in this article, why, let's say, for example, you have injuries, or let's say you haven't worked out in 30 years, and you're now 50 years old or whatever, you want to come back, and you're being discouraged because you're thinking, well, I can't use the weights I used when I was in my 20s. How am I going to get any muscle? This article will be very encouraging to those kind of people because it shows that they can get surprising amount of muscle hypertrophy without lifting heavy weights at all. And so that's what this article. It's kind of a myth busting article.
Yeah, back in the early 60s and stuff, I mean, the big principle was progressive resistance. That's it, right?
Absolutely. That's the underlying cornerstone of weight training. Yeah. In other words, you have to constantly add weight to grow. And that still holds true. In other words, I'm not saying that doesn't work, but in other words, what the difference is that back then that was thought to be the only way. In other words, if you weren't progressive, if you didn't constantly add weight or reps or make some sort of progression, you're not going to make any gains. And you look around you in the gyms today, even I'm sure that you see this in the gyms you go, I see it in Golds all the time. These people, sure enough, they use the same weight They nothing changes, and these people look the same year after year after year. There's no improvement at all. Now, I'm not saying a lot of these guys are trying to be competitive bodybuilders, but they're not showing any improvement. In other words, the fat guys stay fat, the thin guys stay thin. The muscular guys look good, but they never change. There's no change at all. No gains at all. They look the same as they did 4 years ago. Nothing, not a change. For that, you got to do something. You got to, break through homeostasis. You have to push the body. You have to add weight, reps, something has to change. Otherwise, the muscles will always try and stay the same. They literally have to be pushed. That is true.
I was talking about Bill Pearl the other day, and he was saying that he never went to failure.
Yeah.
He just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, Bill Pearl, it's true. He didn't.
He was using heavy weight, though, wasn't
he? He was using very heavy weight.
Yeah.
He's an old school guy. Yeah. Actually, it's funny. Bill Pearl was one of my idols when I was training. I mean, when I first started training. But, when I look back at the way he trained, I realized he made a ton of mistakes, and I didn't realize it at the time. Like, for example, Bill Pearl was a huge believer in abdominal training. He told me that he started his work.
1,000 reps and stuff?
No, he did 12 exercises, 100 reps each. That was his warm-up. 12 abdominal exercises, 100 reps each before every work, and he did it every day. He felt that his philosophy was, if I can see my abs, I'm in good shape. And he believed that doing that volume of abdominal work kept his abs. The truth is, as we both know, first of all, there's no such thing as spot reducing. Second of all, he could have gotten the same thing by just going on a stricter diet. And maybe, I don't know, of course, nobody did aerobics back then, but if he had done aerobics, he could have gotten the same abs by doing abs twice a week with what, 1/10 the amount of training volume. Also he was a believer in doing he did like 20 sets per body part. He's the guy who told me to train my calves every day for 20 sets. Mm-hmm. And I did that, and I lost, after the first month, I lost 2 inches on my calf. Yeah. This is the guy who told me to do side bends. He says, and reps of 100. He said, side bends for the obliques. He says, I said, but Bill, won't that build up, won't that thicken my waist? He says, let me ask you, if you did 100 rep curls, what would happen to your biceps? Well, I said, well, that would require light weights. So I guess my arms would shrink. He said, exactly. He says, that's what happens with your waist. Wrong. I listened to his advice, and I got 3 inches on my waist because my obliques got huge.
Well, he used to do really heavy behind the neck presses too, didn't he?
Yeah, he did behind the neck presses, which is a very dangerous.
I mean, I can't believe he still has shoulders.
I don't know, but I'm sure he's had some shoulder surgery along the way.
Yeah, most of us have.
Seriously.
Never did that.
Anybody who's done, back in that era, I know Arnold's had shoulder surgery. Anybody who's done heavy presses behind the neck for any length of time.
Chris Dickerson's had both 2 shoulder replacements.
There you go.
I was talking to him the other day. Yeah.
Anybody, but I'm telling you, if you would do it consistently for years, that position back here is just destroying your shoulder joint. You will eventually either have to have surgery or you will have painful shoulders as you get older. And same with upright rows, the narrow upright rows, another very, very dangerous shoulder exercise. But, these guys argue with me, these younger guys, when I tell them this. Well, I think it works. It builds my... I said, you know what? I was just like you when I was 25 years old. I was using 300 pounds in the press behind the neck. Now I can barely raise one of my arms. I said, so you know what? You keep doing your press behind the neck. Come back to me in 30 years if I'm still around, and we'll see if you don't have shoulder pain.
Well, it sounds like you got some great stuff in this newsletter.
Oh, yeah. It's this one's about, I think it's about 40 pages. And like I say, the main...
It usually is, right?
yeah, it's never less than that. But the main article, of course, is that adrenal fatigue. And
can't wait to read that.
Yeah, I think that's going to enlighten a lot of people because this is very widespread. I mean, I've had arguments with doctors, believe it or not, who insist that adrenal fatigue is real.
Doesn't surprise me.
I mean, stress is real. It's basically... It's like a confusion. In other words, stress does make you feel tired. It does affect your thinking ability and your concentration. But they're writing it off to a kind of a made-up fad diagnosis because the underlying idea is that with adrenal fatigue, your adrenals literally stopped working, and that's where the problem lies. They don't, because if it stops working, now you have something called Addison's disease. That's a completely different situation.
That's what Kennedy had, wasn't it?
Kennedy had Addison's disease. John F. Kennedy had to take cortisol drugs most of his life. In fact, he almost died from it when he was a young congressman. He had to be put in the hospital because I guess he either couldn't get the drug or something happened. They carried him away on a stretcher. you know. But I mean, they kept it secret, of course, throughout most of his life. But his adrenal glands. I remember reading when they did his autopsy, his adrenal glands were the size of a pea. I mean, normally they're about the size of a palm of your hand. His were the size of a pea. They were so atrophied. He had literally no adrenal glands, and that's what people confuse for adrenal fatigue. It's not the same thing. You don't need to take cortisol. That's a key. That's a tip off. I mean, if your adrenal glands weren't working, think about this, and you took cortisol, you should feel a lot better. But when people with adrenal fatigue, when they take cortisol, all they do is retain water and get fat. It doesn't do, and they lose muscle. That's all. You know, it's crazy. So I felt this thing was like well past due. You know, the fish oil article is going to be very interesting to people over 40 because I go right at the time, right when I was finishing the article, a brand new study which I added to the article. Literally the day after I finished it, this article came out, and the article showed, for some strange reason, older women respond better as far as retaining and building muscle to fish oil than men do. And they don't know, I'm sure it has something to do with it can't be estrogen because these women have lower estrogen. It's some sort of quirk. They just seem to respond. But men do too. I don't want to say that men, in fact, what they found is that the fish oil in relation to helping to build muscle and retain muscle, it works better in older people than it does in younger people. In younger people, it's only a minor effect. As you get past 40, it actually has a major anabolic effect. So it's very important for people over 40. If you don't eat fish, fatty fish like mackerel, herring, halibut, salmon, if you don't eat these types of fish, fatty fish, at least 2 to 3 times a week, you should be considering a fish oil supplement.
You talked me into that because I can't stand fish. So I'd start taking this fish oil.
I just detest fish. I just can't stand. I mean,
you and I are so much alike in so many ways.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's also we have to throw Lee Haney in with us because I remember interviewing him about Lee Haney, one of the great Olympians. I mean, I remember interviewing on his diet, and I said, "Well, how much fish do you eat, Lee?" And I thought he'd say like 2 pounds a day, and he made a face and he says, "I hate fish. Oh my God, I hate it. Oh,
a guy after my own heart."
He says, I can't even be in the room with somebody eating fish, he told me. He's hated it. And it's the first time I ever heard a champion bodybuilder say that he hated fish. It like threw me. And I said, holy, because everybody else there in his era, Rich Gaspari, all these other guys.
Bruce Dickinson ate a lot of fish.
Oh, all these guys were loading up on fish. Remember what they used to do? Before a show, they'd cut out meat or high-fat protein food, and they live on fish to make them like really ripped. You remember that? A lot of the guys.
Yeah, that's why I can't stand fish. Because before I won the Florida, or before I went to the Universe, I was on tuna, fish, and water for a couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, listen, hey, that was my staple for 15, 20 years. My lunch every day consisted of water-packed tuna and cottage cheese and tuna.
Because you had to have the white albacore, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was my lunch for 20 straight years. To this day, I cannot even look at a can of tuna, and I can't. And cottage cheese, forget it. It's great protein. Listen, if you like cottage cheese, it's like eating casein. It's fantastic protein, but I can't. I'm so burnt out on it, even after all these years. I couldn't go near it.
Well, it sounds like you got another great issue.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Can't wait to get to it myself.
You know, and as usual, there's no ads, there's no BS. I'm not trying to sell anything. And I got some great stuff coming up. You know, I'm going to do an update on the best on which fat burning supplements work and which don't. And then I also came across some recent, you know, Richard, in past issues, you might know, you remember I've covered natural bodybuilding preparation. In another article, I covered the preparation as a case study. I covered the actual preparation of one of the top 5 Olympia pros. I even listed his drug program, his diet, everything. So now I'm going to, I think it's time to look at the distaff side. I don't know whether that's a bad word to use for women, but I came across a case study of a woman who was preparing for a figure contest, figure bodybuilding contest. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to just write about the study like other people do. I'm going to analyze it, and I'm going to use, in my own words, I'm going to explain what I think is right and wrong about her preparation. So you're going to get a lot more out of just reading this medical article. I'm like, make it where, let's say a woman reading this article, or let's say a guy who has a girlfriend that's interested, or wife that's interested in competing in that stuff. In other words, they'll know the exact route to take to get in the best shape of their life. So, that's going to be probably,
looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's going to probably be in my next issue.
January?
Yeah, that'll be in the January issue. I have to, I do have a couple of female readers. I don't want to, although most of what I write, interestingly enough, and I think you can attest to this, Richard, most of what I write is actually applicable, like fish oil is applicable to both sexes. It's not really sexist. It's not really limited to men, but occasionally, every so often, or at least a couple of issues, I like to write strict on stuff that really is kind of strictly for women, that so they can relate to it. I want to give something to the female readers too, that they're not going to find anywhere else as usual. They're not going to find this in bodybuilding magazines or even the women's magazines, which are, well, I don't even want to say anything about them. Yeah, but that's the way it goes.
Hey, before we go, I need to wish you and everyone else Merry Christmas.
Absolutely.
Because this is the last one of this year.
Yeah, oh yeah, I second that. I want to wish everybody. Let's see. I guess we'll talk again before New Year's, but definitely everybody listening, have a great Christmas, and I hope you don't overeat and get obese.
Oh, and for those that don't like the Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays. There you go.